There is so much to be said about the moment that we're in, about the world and its brokenness, about the great themes of this year for our people, for our planet. On Rosh Hashanah, I talked about collective grief. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about hope. But tonight, I want to go personal. Because as I said on Erev Rosh Hashanah, the events of the world don't take us off the hook to also do the heart work of these holidays. To reflect on what we've learned along the journey of a year. And hopefully to collect some wisdom. So this is going to be a little personal. I'll start with a joke. An Englishman, a Frenchman, and a Jew. You've heard this one. Are making their way through a scorching desert. The sun is beating down on their backs, and they are drenched in sweat. I'm so thirsty. I'm so thirsty. I can't do accents. I tried beforehand. I couldn't make it work. I'm so thirsty. I'm so thirsty, said the Englishman. I must have a beer. The Frenchman said, I'm so thirsty. I'm so thirsty. I must have wine. The Jew said, I'm so thirsty. I'm so thirsty. I must have diabetes. You like that one? Last summer, sometime around when we all celebrated Cantor Amy and my installation with unlimited Baskin-Robbins ice cream, I began a new daily ritual. I started, when I came into work, filling up a pitcher of water from the kitchen and putting it in my office. It was a hot August. We could all be better hydrated, right? And within an hour, I would drink it all down and then go back and refill the pitcher. And then I would do it again. And then I would do it again. The kitchen started wondering where all of our pitchers had gone. As fall started, more than a few of you, especially those who are just so sweetly attuned to taking care of the rabbi and my family, started offering me unexpected compliments. Rabbi, you're looking good. Are you losing weight? What are you doing differently? And can you teach me? I wasn't sure what to say because honestly, I wasn't doing anything differently. If anything, I was eating like a monster. Stress, I thought. A hectic High Holy Day season followed by the terrible and tragic events in Israel. We were clearly under a lot of strain, and I took a very small consolation in the fact, for the first time ever in my life, stress was causing me to lose weight instead of gain. As fall turned to winter, though, I began to realize that something was definitely off. My clothes weren't fitting right. I particularly remember officiating a funeral and trying to stay focused on the family while struggling to keep my pants up at the cemetery. Then came a week where I lost a pound every single day. I made an appointment to see a doctor. My whole adult life, and this is going to be offensive to like 10% of you in the room, and I apologize, my whole life I've avoided doctors. even before we started living on Zoom, I was an early adopter of those online doc-in-a-box kind of services. I love being able to pop online, request a quick antibiotic from a bored-looking retiree who doesn't ask any questions, or ask if I've ever considered maybe losing a little bit of weight. Over the past several years, I took my wife to a lot of doctor's appointments on the journey to having Grace. And then, of course, we had a baby who needed to be shuttled to the pediatrician. And then came a pandemic and a move and a new job. And somehow my 30s had come and almost gone. I turn 40 next week. Thank you. And I'd not gotten a single physical in that whole time. Not a mazel tov moment. So this time I knew I didn't have a choice. I scheduled an appointment with a new doctor. Thank you to Annie Sugarman, who connected me with him. On the day before Hanukkah, he was pleasant, calm, and extremely casual as he took some blood, ordered some tests, and seemed mostly concerned with reassuring a clearly neurotic new patient that whatever was going on probably wasn't such a big deal, and that I'd hear from the office in a week or so, just to let me know that everything was normal. The next morning, a call interrupted my first meeting of the day. Saw it was my doctor's number. Not so good. I excused myself and stepped in here, into the darkened sanctuary for some privacy, and picked up on the very last ring. Doctor himself on the other end of the phone. That's never good. So your labs came back, and blood sugar is kind of off the charts. I'm sorry to tell you, you're definitely diabetic, and I'm pretty sure you've been for a long time. Could you come in this afternoon, please? I'm so thirsty, the Jew says. Well, here was my answer. Happy Hanukkah. No latkes. So I see the faces, and I hear the murmuring, and let me skip ahead. I'm fine. Like truly, truly fine. Within months of starting some medication and making some pretty significant changes in my kiddush choices, my numbers dropped entirely out of the diabetic range and have stayed there pretty consistently ever since. I have gone on to intentionally this time lose another 25, on a good day, closer to 30 pounds. And for the first time in my life, I have found limited pleasure in an exercise routine. I am still definitely a work in progress, and there is a lot more that I want to achieve. But my doctor told me he'd never seen someone make such a fast turnaround. He's also like 19, so I don't put that much stock in that.
And I commit it. Teeth.
I'm doing great, but I still have diabetes, and I'll always have diabetes now. I've got it well in hand, and I know just how lucky I am to be able to say that. But it's been a year. And I've kept this rather significant news about my health almost entirely to myself. Of course, Anne and my parents and my in-laws have been wonderfully supportive. Gracie knows that too much sugar is bad for Daddy, and so she offers to share her sweet treats, but reminds me, Daddy, just take a little. Come to think of it, I'm not sure her motivations are entirely altruistic in that. But so it goes. But that's it. Aside from my family and a few very close friends and colleagues, I've really not told very many people at all. I live an extremely public life. Every week, sometimes multiple times a week, I stand up here and talk about what's on my mind and in my heart. I tell personal stories, sometimes more than my wife would prefer that I tell. But this new part of my daily reality for the past 9 months, haven't been ready to talk about it till now. I decided I wanted to share it tonight for a couple of reasons. The first one is this: we love each other. We love each other, and when we love each other, we shouldn't have shame. For a long while, I felt a lot of shame about this diagnosis. Type 2 diabetes is considered for many people to be a lifestyle disease. And yes, genetics play a big role, to be sure, and there are people who live on terrible diets and no exercise, and their pancreases just grin and bear it. But there is a bitter pill of truth that I bear some responsibility for where I find myself. The choices I made to neglect my physical health for decades, not taking the time to go to the doctor, not just avoiding, but actively making fun of the concept of exercise, my deep and abiding love of classic, fully leaded Coca-Cola, none of that helped. It's hard to own up to the fact that I made some not great choices, and I wasn't lucky enough to be able to dodge paying for them, even to the age of 40. But if I'm serious with all my talk about this place being mishpacha, family, then how can I not be real with my family about what's going on with me? How can I presume to be authentically this community's teacher about teshuvah without acknowledging that I've got plenty of work to do on myself? As with everything, the best antidote to shame is the willingness to speak truth out loud. To own up to the fact that we're all human, subject to many temptations and well-ingrained bad habits and foibles. The sooner we stop pretending to be anything other than flawed and fragile beings, the sooner we can start to grow and heal. The great Hasidic teacher Rabbi Nachman once said, if you believe something can be broken, you must also believe that it can be fixed. Yeah, but first we need to acknowledge the broken places, and then we can start to put ourselves back together again. And I realized I needed to talk about this specifically on Yom Kippur, because over the last 9 months I've come to understand that I had internalized a quite unhelpful version of the message of this day. All my life I'd heard rabbis give the sermon that the reason that we fast and abstain on Yom Kippur is to challenge us to get out of our bodies and focus on our souls. I told a generation of Intro to Judaism students the same thing. As I understood it and taught it, the idea was that by turning attention away from the distractions of our physical needs, we would be able to tap into a greater holiness, that we are closest to what matters most when we are least in our bodies. I imagine this rebalancing of focus might have been important to our ancestors, who did hard labor every day, drawing forth their bread from the earth by the sweat of their brow. But for me, and I'm presuming to give this sermon because I suspect it's true for not a few of us, each in our own ways, my main problem is not how to get out of my body, but how to get into it. Particularly in the Jewish community, many of us go into fields which primarily reward us for our minds, not our bodies. We famously become doctors, lawyers, accountants, business people, teachers, counselors, Jewish nonprofit professionals. We think and talk and type for a living, and these days interact with the world mostly through video conference, where we are quite literally a head on shoulders. When I meet people for the first time who I've been meeting with for years, they say, "You're tall." And I say, "You didn't know the half of me." Over the last 2 decades in which I trained to become a rabbi and sought to make a name for myself and establish myself in this professional role, I have seen my body almost exclusively as a vehicle for carrying my brain from room to room. That's certainly what I've been rewarded for. On that journey of learning over those 2 decades, I've been fortunate to find the most incredible Rabbis and teachers for my mind and soul, but I only just realized, and quite a bit too late, that I never even thought to seek out any learning about how to care for this mess of muscle and bone and blood and plumbing and wiring that's so essential to everything else. That as I strove to live and even had the chutzpah to think I could role model for others what I imagined to be some kind of a holy life, that I had thoroughly bought into the idea that such a life should transcend the physical rather than live in it. It's a long history of religion promoting an indifference to or even a hostility towards the body. The Western Christian tradition, deeply influenced by Platonic thought, conceives of us as divided beings, possessed of earthly bodies and heavenly souls, in constant tension and conflict with one another. In this dichotomy, the body represents all that is animal, our base instincts, our shameful needs, our mortality. On the other hand, the soul is pure spirit, perfect, belonging to an entirely different realm of existence. The soul, Plato taught, is trapped in the prison of the flesh. The body, as St. Paul called it, is nothing but the seat of sin. If the body is the seat of sin and the prison house of the soul, then of course holiness is to be found in the rejection of our physicality and the turning of our attention to our truer and more elevated nature. Judaism is not immune to this sort of thinking. Many of the Jewish philosophers, and particularly the Kabbalists, the mystics, attach themselves very firmly to the idea of a profane physical body that ensnares and obscures our divine essence. But there's an older, deeper, and I believe much wiser pattern of Jewish thought that rejects this view of us as divided beings, fundamentally at war with ourselves. In our tradition, we find the most extraordinary teachings that treat the body as an object of reverence, a living manifestation of God's glory on earth. It begins with what I hold to be the foundational concept of the Torah, present from its very first chapter, that human beings are created, b'tselem Elohim, in God's image and likeness. Abraham Joshua Heschel taught that the reason it's forbidden to create a physical representation of God has nothing to do with the fear that we might be so foolish as to actually bow down to a statue or graven image, but rather that it would distract us from the fact that we can encounter the image of God every hour of every day. We only need to look at each other. I think we sense this best when we look at a baby. I remember sitting for hours when Gracie was little, tracing with my finger her eyebrows and the seashell curves of her ears, and counting and recounting her fingers, and wondering at this perfect little human form, an image of God, if I ever saw one. I still think so. What would it be like to see each other with similarly reverent eyes? To look at a friend or a stranger, or you ready for a challenge, in the mirror, and feel wonder rather than shame. Feel a sense of the incredible artistry manifest in these physical bodies. Jewish law further teaches that since our divine crafted selves are ultimately the property of their maker, we are obligated to keep them in the best possible condition for their eventual return. Hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha me'od. Take utmost care and guard yourself, says Deuteronomy. For most Jews, this translates into the myth. It's a myth that we all heard somewhere that it's forbidden to be buried in a Jewish cemetery if we have a tattoo. Raise your hand if you've heard that one. Made up by Jewish mothers. I'm serious. If we thought about it for a second, think about this. A murderer, a Ponzi schemer, the guy who came up with the thing where you have to see all the bicycles in the picture in order to prove you're not a robot on the internet. All of those people can be buried in a Jewish cemetery. But the butterfly on your tuchus that you got in college, or the Am Yisrael Chai that you proudly got inked in November, that keeps you from the higher class sections of Harbor Lawn? The fact is, the obligation of Shmirat HaGuf, guarding the body, is way more expansive than that. In preparation for writing this sermon, I had the privilege of spending an hour with Rabbi Elliot Dorff, longtime past chair of the Conservative Movement's Committee on Jewish Law, and one of the world's foremost scholars of bioethics and halakha. In my interview with him, he said over and over again that we can understand activities from smoking to excess drinking to eating the American diet of processed foods to a lifetime of sitting immobile at desks, all as violations of Jewish law. Every bit as serious as a violation of Shabbat or Kashrut. If we're truly obligated to take utmost care and guard ourselves, then when we eat, our responsibility, our Jewish responsibility, goes beyond determining if the food is milk or meat. If you're one of those people who prefers to go for a hike on Shabbos morning rather than come to shul, you're good. That's Avodat HaKodesh, that's holy service, provided you break a sweat. Most of all, Rabbi Dorff emphasized to me that to take these concepts seriously is to reject the deeply ingrained idea that many of us have, that I still struggle with, that self-care is selfish, and rather see taking care of these extraordinary and sacred bodies as an essential aspect of living a life of mitzvot. To help us remember this powerful and often challenging lesson, Judaism offers us a frankly delightful practice that I invite everybody to consider taking on this year. You ready? It begins in a place not usually spoken of on Kol Nidre Eve. It begins in the bathroom and commences immediately after we finish doing the most embodied thing we do. Everybody does it. Read a book to Gracie about that. After we finish, and as soon as we've washed our hands, because we're not animals, the Talmud teaches us to say a prayer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher yitzar et adam b'chokhmah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who created us with wisdom, who made within us many openings and closings. You ready? If just one of those openings were to close, or just one of those closed places were to open, Galui v'yadua lifnei kisei kavodecha, it is known before your holy throne, after you finish on the holy throne, that it would be impossible to stand before you. Blessed is Adonai, who heals all flesh and does wonders. That's a real bracha in your prayer book. There is, I venture, almost no prayer in our liturgy that has more power to utterly change our lives than that one. And it's for pooping. If that seems silly, or maybe a little obscene, consider whether we still would when our bodies stop working the way they should. Something open closes off. We might call that a heart attack. A closed system springs a leak. We might call that a stroke. An accident that changes our body in an instant, a disease that slowly and silently progresses until it threatens to undermine or even steal away the whole life that we've built. We are wonderfully and intricately made, so stunning in our complexity, so improbable in the incredible amount that needs to go right for us to live a single hour. It's a wonder that any of us last longer than a mayfly, much less the better part of a century. Just to breathe is a blessing. Just to breathe is a blessing. Last year for my birthday, Anne bought me a book written by a professor at Duke Divinity School named Kate Bowler. I just wrote her a fan letter. Actually, a fan Instagram message. That's how we do it now. Kate was 35 years old, and she was married to her high school sweetheart, and they were raising a small son. She had just published a book called Blessed, a history of the prosperity gospel, this idea in some evangelical circles that if you have a lot, God must love you extra. And then, just like that, she's diagnosed with cancer. Bad cancer. As Kate writes in her memoir, it's got a wonderful name, No Cure for Being Human. Is that wonderful? Suddenly, the long horizon of her life moved. And the whole journey that had once extended so far into the distant future contracted into 90-day increments between scans. With each test that showed her tumors responding to an experimental immunotherapy, she was granted another 3 months of life. And 3 more months, and 3 more months. Eventually, thank God, her cancer went into remission, and her 90-day window stretched to 6 months and then to a year at a time. But once the illusion of infinite days is pierced, she writes, we are never the same again. We learn that our bodies are simultaneously so strong and so delicate, so gloriously capable of doing extraordinary things, and that also, even under the best of circumstances, 90 days is not guaranteed. Nothing is. And so we do our very best to care for these miraculous machines, for these beautiful, breakable bodies sealed with the imprimatur of the Holy One. Far from being the prisons of our souls, these tattered body clothes, they're the most precious gift we ever get. It took this tough year to teach me that. And thank God I was spared learning that hard lesson from a much more terrible or life-endangering disease. Like I said, I'm okay. I'll continue to be okay. I have every plan to keep working on getting healthy and staying that way for a very, very long time. I got lots of plans. But I now join with many of you in this room, probably the majority, who have some form of a chronic illness that's never going to completely go away. Just the way it is. And so I'll spend the rest of my life needing to bring a new level of intention to the food that I eat, to the way that I move, to the medications that I diligently take, to a new awareness of limits as I work to keep a progressive condition from progressing just as long as I can. But with that awakening comes a profound gift, the opportunity to discover the miracle that is me, and you, and us. To start a new decade of life, for the first time, finally learning how to love this fragile and amazing body. To see cooking a healthy meal, or going for a midday walk, or prioritizing simple acts of self-care, not as distractions from a more worthy pursuit, but as an act of sacred service, an attending to the image of God, of whom I am a physical manifestation. And so are you, and so are we all. Barchi nafshi et Adonai, v'kol kravai et shem kodsho. Bless the Holy One, O my soul. With all my body, I give praise to your name. Shana Tova.